Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us again this Sunday morning for our video service. I hope you've been able to get out and enjoy this beautiful weather we've been having. I love it because it's warm during the day and it cools off at night so you can sleep really comfortably. We better take advantage of it because it's not going to last much longer, I don't think. I think we're going to have an earlier fall than we anticipated. You can feel it in the morning when you get up in the morning. It's a little chilly. Anyway, I hope you're taking advantage of it. I just have a couple of things today to go over. Again, our men's group has taken the month of August off and they'll be kicking off a new series, a 13-week series starting after Labor Day. So if you're interested in that, let Pastor Carl, Pastor Carlos, or CR know so that we can get you a book ordered for that. I think they're about $17 or $18 for the book, so I know they'd love to have you be part of it. Our ladies group is still meeting on Thursday nights at 6:30 on Zoom. And we're going to continue probably our Zoom meeting just because of the fact that we have several people who have moved out of the area and still want to be part of the Father's house. So we may come back and have a different meeting for the ladies at the church, but at this point in time, we're comfortable staying on our Zoom calls. Today's our regular tithe and offering. You know the drill. You can go to thefathershouse.org, click on the giving button, set it up as a one-time gift or a recurring gift. You can give to our missions that way, or you can give to our stage remodel, which we've talked about raising money in order to buy cameras to do a live stream service. So you can mail a check also to the Father's House at 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Or if you live in the local area and you'd like Pastor Carl or I to come by and pick up a check, we'd be happy to do that too. But once again, thank you for all your generosity in your giving, and we do appreciate it. We do appreciate you. That's all I have to cover today, so I guess we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl.
Well, good morning, Father's House. How are you today? I trust all is going well again. Like Penny said, it's a beautiful day outside. We've had absolutely gorgeous weather, although we're getting close to Labor Day now, and it looks like it's going to heat up for Labor Day. But hopefully by that time, by the time it gets there a week from today, it will the weather will have changed. It's going to be cooler than what they were saying it was going to be, because the way it's looking, it's going to be a hot spell coming in. But that is what it is. We haven't had a lot this year, so that's going to have been the good thing. Anyway, glad to have you with us. And Penny went over all of our other house cleaning issues that we were going through. So I thought maybe what I do is I would just kind of continue in this new series that we started, talking about the 7 pillars of wisdom. There's a lot that can be said about the 7 pillars of wisdom, and I kind of want to I'll kind of refresh a little bit of what we said last week when we talked about this, and kind of as far as what we talked about. And we kind of said it in the context of the scripture that we've been reading. But, it kind of comes back again to the reason that I decided to do this series on the 7 pillars of wisdom has a lot to do with the fact that wisdom is something that's lacking in our life. In our lives, I should say. There's you look at Facebook, you watch TV, you read things that have been written, things that are said, and you realize that in some cases there's just not a lot of wisdom in the world. And so wisdom is at a high premium. And so with that, then, the thought would be for us, and also for me, is the idea that it's something that I value in my own life. It's something that I want more of, and I want to become more seasoned in. But that means ultimately, if I'm going to get that, I've got to apply myself diligently, both in the area of understanding what wisdom is, when you're talking about speculative wisdom or learning by way of knowledge, understanding books, different avenues of wisdom. And also the practical wisdoms of how do you apply wisdom? I mean, if wisdom isn't practical, if we don't make it practical, it doesn't do any good. It's almost like the idea of Christian, where we say they're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. And sometimes you can be so well educated that you lack common sense. And so wisdom always has with it the notion of common sense, as well as the idea of understanding what wisdom is in an intellectual capacity, I guess you could say. But we'll talk more about that maybe. Maybe we won't. We'll see how it goes. But I want to go back and read this scripture about the 7 pillars of wisdom that was talked about in the book of Proverbs. And again, talking about that we've been applying them really in most cases, or I did last week and we'll do again this week, to the life of Christ. And we kind of talked about the idea of Christ is our example, or we would call him our exemplar or our exemplar cause, which is the same thing as our example, our blueprint on what wisdom is. Jesus Christ is the perfect model for what every Christian should aspire to be, and the way that we should carry ourselves, both within our minds and within our own bodies and in our actions. So Jesus Christ becomes the standard by which we judge ourselves and that we choose to live. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and we'll talk about making application out of this text that we're talking about. But I want to read the whole text to you again, the same way that I did last week, in talking about the idea of these 7 pillars of wisdom. So in Proverbs chapter 9, starting at verse 1, it reads as follows. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has prepared a food, and she has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come, eat of my food and drink of my wine that I have mixed. And then she says, forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. He who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insult for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the understanding and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone will bear it. So the notion and the idea there is that wisdom, and the acquisition of wisdom is, in some cases, it's the end in itself to become a wise person. And so in this book, in this text that we're reading out of Proverbs, Solomon is kind of pointing out the notion that Lady Wisdom, wisdom being personified here in a female sense, is inviting the naive or the simple to come and to learn of her, to make her lover to some extent. She's inviting the naive and the simple to fall in love with her, which is wisdom. And so there's this invitation for us to fall in love with wisdom and to be pursuers and lovers of wisdom. And so that's kind of what the whole scenario is, or the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs. And this one kind of is the capstone talking about it when we talk about the 7 pillars of wisdom, or that which we build a wise life on. Now, in reading this text, it doesn't seem like there's 7 pillars, but they're there if we kind of look a little bit deeper. Last week we talked about we should consider 1 or 2 of the pillars. We talked about the idea or the notion of, first of all, forsaking folly. Remember we talked about that, forsaking folly. And the idea, or the foolish. And so the idea of forsaking the foolish things or folly is the idea of not allowing ourselves or letting ourselves be in situations where foolishness reigns supreme. And so the idea is, what is the crowd, or who is the crowd that we run with? Are they people that are looking to promote themselves, promoting better things in other people? Are they a group of people that are keeping you down and not having you go forward in your life? In that case, you're surrounding yourself not with wise people, but you're on the road with the foolish. And with that is you're spending time with those people that are foolish. And it's kind of like the idea of the notion of, tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. In other words, our friends are a pretty good indication of those, traits that are in us. But Lady Wisdom says if we're going to understand the pillars of wisdom, understand what they are, the first thing is to forsake folly or foolishness, to turn away from it, to turn our back on foolishness and begin to, as it says, become or start walking on the path of understanding. So in that instance, there's this turning away from foolishness, which is friendships in some cases, also attitudes and actions that we have within ourselves, and turning ourselves and beginning to walk on the path of understanding. Last week we talked about the idea or the notion of what's meant here by understanding, and it's such a big and broad term, but we talked about it in a way of discretion and discernment, if you recall. Discretion means basically when we size up and look at a situation. And we look at it and we're looking to see whether or not, in this instance, using discretion, whether or not it's foolishness for us to partake, or whether a scene or an activity that we're involved in or a group of people is that we use discretion on whether those things promote the good in us or if they stop the good from within us, or that even in some cases they turn us to evil acts or evil intentions. And so in that case, we've got to be discreet and use a little discretion. And the other one is the discernment. So they kind of go hand in hand, meaning the same thing, but to discern the times, discern where we are, to make valuable, reasonable judgments on our circumstances all the time, so that we understand that which is foolish from that which is wise, that which is holy from that which is profane, or that which is valuable from that which has no value at all. That's what we're kind of talking about here. The second thing we're talking about, the pillars of wisdom, is found in the very next text after we read that. And so I'll read this, and we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about it. Again, verse 6 says, "Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding." Here's the other pillar. "And he who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insult for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you." So we're talking really about two things here. We're talking first of all about correction, and then we're talking about being reproved or reproof. So what this text is saying is it's saying that if you reprove a scoffer or correct a scoffer or a foolish person, then they're going to hate you. In other words, they're going to turn against you because they don't like what it is that you say. And so there's this idea of when you correct somebody, and if they're foolish, what they're going to ultimately do is they're going to hate you. They're going to reject you. They're going to turn you away. Well, we can kind of see that in the life of Christ, because Christ being the example of wisdom, personified wisdom, you can see how even the religious leaders and the people of society turned away from Jesus when he would reprove them or correct them. The second one, talking about correction and the idea of reproof, is the second word. So you've got this notion of correction and this notion of reproof, which are really two different words in how they relate to us. The bottom line is this, though. The pillar of wisdom for all people is whether or not we have the ability and the humility to accept correction when correction's needed in our life. And the second thing is to accept reproof when things in our life are judged to be deficient, as you would have it. Let me give you an example of that. So the first thing and there's really two other words that we can use concerning this is, the first is to, let me look it up here. For some reason, it just slipped my mind. To admonish. So the first word is to admonish. The second is to adjudicate, which they're big words. So the idea of admonish is the idea of when we're doing something wrong and people see things in our life that aren't good for us, or they're leading us down the wrong path, then the way to correct that is to admonish somebody, to tell them they're going the wrong way. Well, how would that work, or what would that look like? Well, I can tell you, if you're a female and you've ever driven with a male, and when a male finds that he's lost in a city or going a different direction, the one thing that a man very seldom will not do is consult a map. And so what happens is he's going to figure it out on his own. He knows where he is. Whether he's completely lost or not, he's going to find that in that he's going to try to figure it out for himself. Well, the wife, thinking the better of it, says, honey, and she admonishes him and corrects him by saying, have you ever thought about looking at a map? If we look at a map, we'll know where we are and we'll know where we have to go. Well, the guy at that point, being somewhat arrogant, I don't want to look at a map, I can figure it out. And then pretty soon he gets more lost and more lost. Pretty soon he pulls over to the gas station, pulls out the map, looks at it, and realizes that in the admonition of his wife, he should have listened. In that case, he displayed foolishness, didn't he? In that case, when his wife wanted to correct him, he wouldn't receive that correction. And so what Scripture is saying here is that the wise person, when they're admonished to do good things for the most part, not just the reading of a map, but when we're admonished to stay away from foolish things, to stay away from things that aren't best for us in the ultimate sense. When people want to correct us, the fool in this matter always finds himself hating that person and rejecting the correction of that person. But in this text, what you see is there's this tension between the foolish and the wise. And it says the wise are the ones that accept the correction. And because they accept the correction, what happens to them? They become wiser. What is the fool when he doesn't accept the correction? What happens to them when they're admonished? Well, they remain in their folly or their foolishness. So you can see that the pillar, or one of the pillars for us in the way of wisdom, is for us to be able to receive correction, admonishment, to do better, to perform better, to hang out with better people, to think better, to speak better, to act better in those different things. We're admonished by wise people to do them. However, if we find ourselves rejecting those things because of pride or other reasons, then what happens is we find that we're giving ourselves to foolishness rather than giving ourselves to Lady Wisdom. The second one here is the notion and the idea of adjudicate. And so we talked about the first one being correction, the second one coming by way of reproof. Adjudicate is really kind of a legal term, but it's kind of an interesting term in what is really kind of being said here. So let's walk through our progression. Our progression began with when we first started talking about forsaking the way of folly. And the second thing is then using discretion and discernment, we are to walk in the way of understanding. Well, through our discernment and our discretion then, when people correct us, when they admonish us, if we're wise in pursuing wisdom, we'll become wiser. We'll take it into consideration. And in taking it into consideration, we'll evaluate whether it's good admonition or not, and we'll choose what it is that we want to do. Adjudicate has a different meaning in the legal sense because it means in some cases to judge or to be judged. And in this case, it's accusative in somebody accusing us in a court of law. So the notion of that would be, we're in the middle of, we're getting ready to start, not middle, we're in the middle of preseason, but we're getting ready to start football. So somebody that would adjudicate a football game would be the referees. So the referees of a football game are those that understand the rules of the game, and when both sides are playing together, if there's an infraction by one side or the other, as we know, they pull out the penalty flag, and in that they make a judgment call based on something that they saw on the field. In that case, they're adjudicating, they're accusing a lineman of holding. They're accusing a player of pass interference or of offsides or illegally grounding the football. There's a certain set of rules, and what it is the ref, in that case, is adjudicating the calls. So, but in this instance, we're kind of talking about football. But the instance that we may be talking about here, which is the same thing by adjudication, is being in a court of law or when somebody brings an argument against us. So the idea now, and it really has to do with our moral character. See, everything we're talking about has everything to do with our moral character, if you think about it. Turning away from folly is something that's positive to our moral character. Good moral character always seeks understanding, discernment, discretion. Good moral character allows us to be corrected. And good moral character allows for our lives to be adjudicated by an argument against a moral deficiency that's in us. So the idea would be that in this case, where it's an accusation made, and I'm not talking here about an accusation where somebody comes in and says, well, you need to do this and you need to do that, and well, you did this wrong. I saw you speeding. You were going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, and you need to never do that again. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when people come and where they're giving rational reasons as to why you shouldn't do something foolish. So in other words, you're using an argument of reason, which isn't a bad thing. So let's say you decided that you were going to, and this is just be an example, but it'll be a simple example. So let's say that you were a young man and you started going to the car lot and you fell in love with a Corvette that was a two-seater Corvette. You went to the car lots, you looked at them, you test drove them, you got in them, you talked with the different salespeople about it. You even went so far as to work a good deal on buying this expensive Corvette. But you really have two problems. Number one, you can't really afford the Corvette. Well, maybe three. You can't really afford the Corvette, and for you to afford it means that you would put yourself in further debt that would put strain on your family if you're a family man. The second problem is a Corvette isn't a good family vehicle if you have two children and a wife. So a Corvette in that case would be a very foolish investment, or not even investment, a purchase for you to be able to buy, wouldn't it? Because it wouldn't when using discernment, it wouldn't fit the needs of your family. Well, in that case, a person that would adjudicate or step in and judge that and accuse you, they would simply say that that's not a wise thing and that's a foolish thing. And they would make a judgment on that which you were going to do or on that which you were going or what you did do. So in that case, it's the judge that's sitting there in a court of law. And you've got the prosecutor prosecuting you for something that you did. And you're standing there and you've got your defense for what you did. And the judge who's adjudicating it would make a decision on what was morally best for you. In that instance, then what happened is, let's say you're found guilty of something. You say, I don't care. I'm not going to listen to what the judge says. He's nothing but a fool. Or you can say, I'm not going to listen to what that person has to say about me buying a Corvette. They're nothing but a fool. There's no way I need to listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. And you go out and make the mistake of buying a Corvette. In that instance, or in a court of law, the thing that's happening is that you become a foolish person and you become a scoffer, and you've hated the argument in the counsel that was sound wisdom that was presented before you. You see, the thing about us, when we are in a position where we are wise men, then to receive correction, and by receiving correction, then what it's going to do is it's going to make us a better person. The same thing when there's an accusation against our moral character, about decisions we would make, about the way that we think, the books that we read, the programs that we watch, the people we hang out with, how we spend our money, and a plethora of other things. I want to tell you that the wise man is always open to a sound argument as to what he ought to do and what he ought not to do. You see, those are some of the foundational things concerning wisdom. You see, when we let our desires and our greed, and we let those things that we want, I want, get in the way, then what happens with that is we let our desires and our passions rule our life. We don't let wisdom and reason and knowledge and understanding, discernment and discretion rule our lives. And so what we do is we choose the path of the foolish and the path of the scoffer. The wise man in every instance will learn to listen to correction, will also let somebody adjudicate an argument and present it to him concerning their moral character and their actions and their attitudes and their words. So in all of that thing, those become pillars of a wise person. Discernment, discretion, receiving correction, and receiving a judgment and an accusation against your character where it needs to be so. I'm not talking about Christians running around and accusing everybody of everything. I'm not talking about that at all. In some cases, it's God who accuses you. It's God that makes a judgment on you. Don't forget, at the end of your life, God's going to adjudicate your life before His court. We can start that process now. Whenever we let somebody correct us, whenever somebody presents a solid, firm argument for why we ought to become a better moral person, to become more like Jesus, the thing that happens is it's only for our benefit. A scoffer scoffs at that, but a wise man, he understands that. It's kind of the story of Jesus, isn't it? If I was going to relate this to Jesus' life and the idea that Jesus was the best one to admonish us and also the one to adjudicate on behalf of us, then he would be the perfect example. Remember when there was the woman caught in adultery? And when a woman was caught in adultery, there was a scene that happened there. They drug her before Jesus. And all of these accusers that were accusing her said, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. The law says she should be stoned. What do you think? In that case, two things were happening, right? They were, number one, reproving the woman for her actions, meaning the Pharisees. At the same time, they were asking Jesus to adjudicate the situation. In that instance, Jesus, at that point, then he admonishes the people that are standing there with rocks, the men ready to stone her. And he adjudicates on her behalf. He admonishes them by way of correction, of saying, how about this? You're right. The law of Moses does say that she should be stoned. But how about this? How about if you're a person that's never sinned, you cast the first stone? In that case, he was admonishing them of their own sin. He was basically calling attention to the fact that they had sinned, and that because of that, they had no way of being able to cause this woman's life to be in danger to them. Then in asking, would this woman be adjudicated? The men, after being corrected by Jesus, it says that they began to drop their rocks and walk away, and he adjudicated the offense with the woman, saying, woman, where are your accusers? And she looked up and said, they're gone, Lord. He said, neither do I accuse you, but what I'm asking you to do is go and sin no more. You're set free from this. I've adjudicated it. I've given a right judgment. And a right judgment is simply this. Don't put yourself in that moral position again. Something worse might happen to you. In that case, the adjudication of Jesus Christ was done with mercy and grace. And also his correction of the scribes and Pharisees that wanted to kill her was done with mercy and grace. In other words, it was meant for their own good and not for their hurt. He wasn't trying to pick a fight with the scribes and Pharisees and the men, and he wasn't trying to see the woman condemned. He was simply saying the wise person will receive the correction, and the wise person in the adjudication will understand the moral dilemma and the consequences of their actions and change them. A scoffer and a fool will reject what I'm saying today. They'll reject wisdom. But more than that, maybe not what I'm saying, but they'll reject correction, and they'll reject an argument when there's something lacking in their life that somebody is presenting. The wise person, the person that understands the value of wisdom, will listen carefully and adjust their lives appropriately. The question today is simply this. Which person do you want to be? I can tell you it's hard when people correct me. It's hard when people have a great case against my moral character that's causing me to reflect and choose to change. But it's up to me to say yes. It's up to me to take in what they say and to become wiser because of it. I guess the question today is, what about you? When people correct you, and when people bring an argument against you in different things where it's a legitimate argument, are you open to correction? Are you open to reproof? Because if you were, I promise you, you'll become wiser. Jesus, whenever he comes about, and our model should be Jesus, is any time that he corrects or any time that he adjudicates, he always does it with justice and mercy hand in hand. I hope you'll think about it today. And I hope you'll say yes to correction. I hope you'll say yes to reproof. For in so doing, you will prove to be a wise man or woman or child. God bless you. I hope this makes sense to you. And I hope that you'll come back next week. We'll talk more about it, and have a great day.